Nice work. Okay. There are two that are kind of similar here. Why didn't God say that he is love right away? Why did he wait until Jesus and have to get us confused by this Old Testament, New Testament stuff? Another way that somebody put it was, if God knew that he was going to send Jesus all along, why did he even bother with prophets in the Old Testament?
Just a quick response maybe to the first question. Greg can handle the last one. It's funny how I do this in my theology class at Bethel. Every time I teach it, I come to a point of the problem of evil, and I talk about the problem of the Old Testament versus the New Testament gods. And all I have to say is that, and then say to my students, tell me about the Old Testament God. And we make a list on the board, and it's the same list every year. Wrathful, legalistic, and just this not great guy. And then, okay, New Testament God. Loving, forgiving, It's like, what's up with these two? And this seems to be a common Christian view. What's strange is if you go and ask a Jewish rabbi, for example, tell me about the Old Testament God, which is his only testament, you don't get the kind of list that Christians produce. What you get usually is a Jew. If you ask what is the quintessential picture of God in the Old Testament, they will take you to Exodus 34, verses 6 and 7, where they will say was the most definitive revelation of God. God came and revealed himself to Moses, and what he revealed himself as was Yahweh, Yahweh God, full of compassion, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness, willing to forgive sin, iniquity, and transgression. The very same words we use for the New Testament view of God. So I think we have once again allowed certain portions of the Old Testament to cloud our vision of what in fact God is most quintessentially revealed himself as, namely in these revelatory moments. That revelation gets picked up by many Old Testament authors, and they keep repeating those words revealed to Moses of who God really is. So I think we need to have that on the table. God is always, from Exodus right through, reveal himself as fundamentally love, mercy, forgiveness, kindness, these sorts of things.
And tonight we like the word quintessential. Okay? That's the feature word for tonight.
That's tonight's word.
We're all using it. But that doesn't alleviate the problem. What it does is just introduce the problem into the Old Testament itself, because now you have this love strand in the Old Testament revelation of God combined with this violent strand in the Old Testament itself. And then what happens is in the New Testament, it's like it gets distilled and incarnated where the love side wins. And God is saying, this has been my heart all along. This really is my heart. So to resolve that tension, the way I look at it, and this is kind of what I talked about earlier, is to say, I would argue that all of the violence that was allowed and even in cases commanded, all of that the side of God that doesn't look like Jesus Christ was the result of cultural accommodation. The violence, I think, was on a par with the slavery, which was on a par with women being treated as property, which was on a par with some of the other things that were allowed in the Old Testament. It's the patient missionary accommodating himself to the language of the culture. Now, why didn't he do it earlier? Why didn't he do it more fully earlier? I don't know if we can ever know that, except to say this, that we still don't get it. I think we would have got it even less back then. God had to take one nation and hammer in the law and lay down this foundation in order to prepare the final revelation of himself in Jesus Christ. And so far as I can see, we still don't get it. Many in the Christian church are embarrassed by the outrageous love of God. They think you're watering down things, or God can't be that beautiful. And people will have trouble giving themselves permission to believe that God is really that gracious and that beautiful. So it doesn't surprise me that he didn't even do it even earlier than at the time of Christ.